Okay, college football nuts, the Big D is back as we preview the 2024 college football season with David Moulton. Before we discuss all things college football, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my content. Might be Hurricanes, might be drafts, it might be football or UFC. Also check out the Big D podcast for the audio listeners, Spotify and Apple. So joining me, the only guy who travels more for college football and NFL games during the season, David Moulton. So David, 11 days until week zero begins with Boston College and Florida State in Dublin, which you actually did a few years ago.
Yeah, 12 years ago, I was lucky enough to do Notre Dame and Navy in Dublin. What do we have? Georgia Tech, Florida State this year. A lot of Florida State fans I know look forward to this. They booked it. What will be interesting to me, D, is ESPN is doing the game. Game day will be there. And Florida State fans hate ESPN right now. They believe that ESPN kept them out of the playoff, that they rigged it so that Alabama and Texas, two SEC schools, would get in at the expense of Florida State last year. And so I'll be very curious as to what the crowd is like and what the chants are like towards game day. And I'm being brutally honest. I mean, it's a 6-hour time difference. So when game day is going on live in Dublin, it'll be 3 p.m. Do you know how much alcohol will have been consumed Saturday by the Florida State faithful between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.? And then Kirk Herbstreit and company, who they are convinced kept them out of the playoff, are then going to be on stage. I am telling you, if they allow the crowd the access that they normally do, the chants are going to be, at the very least, NC-17.
That's yeah. Especially in Dublin, it won't be just Guinness. Maybe more than that, right?
Oh no! Well, I mean, they will have been there a couple of days already. I mean, they will have the need just Saturday morning to get up and keep drinking, just so that the pain doesn't come into effect. So no, I'm serious. The Florida State fan is still angry. They will never forget the snub in December of last year, and they have no recourse except to curse at ESPN and Kirk Herbstreit and company and chant what it is they want to chant.
Well, good news for Florida State and all of college football fans. There's a 12-team playoff. So if Florida State wins the ACC this year, the Seminoles are going to be a top 4 seed anyway.
Exactly. They'll get a first-round bye. There's nothing that ESPN could do about it. And what would have been interesting, Alabama won the SEC last year, but of course, Texas last year in the Big 12 also won the Big 12. So in theory, they would have been 3 of the top 4 seeds. But yes, this current year, if Florida State wins the ACC, they get a top 4 seed in the first-round bye.
I think most of us agree that the 12-team playoff is long overdue, and it's a great thing for college football. But I see one potential problem. The quarterfinal games are in neutral stadiums, and I'm like, why can't quarterfinal games be played on campus? And I mean, yes, you create a situation where like Penn State plays Auburn and it's 50 and it's snowing, and I'm like, that's part of football. You play outside, right?
I think most fans agree with you. This is where the business comes into play, and I'll be curious as to how long this part of the playoff remains a business, D. The bowl system is trying to be preserved. And so if you put the quarterfinals, the 4 quarterfinals, on college campuses, then we're back to what we just had the last few years, which is there's only 3 big bowl games, and the other 40 are filler. And so what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to prop up 7 bowl games a year instead of just 3. And they've got the 6 or 7 in mind. If you think about it, we all know what used to be the big 4, Rose, Cotton, Fiesta, Orange, Sugar, that's 5. Throw in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta as 6. So there's 6. And then what they can do is put the national championship game up for bid. Cities will bid. So in theory, they can take care of the 6 major bowls that they want to take care of. Peach and orange in Atlanta and Miami, cotton in Dallas, Rose Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Sugar Bowl in Louisiana. Okay, we've taken care of the tradition of college football. We've ensured that these games are all very meaningful. And then we put the national championship up for bid, like a Final Four, like a Super Bowl, etc.
True, I get that. Plus, in a way, you could have fans go to like different stadiums, but like the stadiums in Arlington, Atlanta, Miami, and New Orleans also host NFL games.
Yep, and so does Arizona, and the Rose Bowl. Obviously, they don't, but it's available if needed, and they plan on a game there January 1st of every year. I mean, that's what will be curious to me. D is when the schools that get the first round buys. Like, let's just go by the polls this year. Let's just say Georgia wins the SEC, so they'll get a top 4 seed. They don't get a home game; they get a bye. But in Alabama or a Texas or whoever in the SEC, they finish as a runner-up, second or third best team in the SEC. They get a 5 through 8 seed. They get to host a first-round game. I think schools are going to wait to see just how popular those games are with their fans, what kind of a scene it's like on campus, and also how much money is generated by those games, and do they feel that they're missing out? Like at the moment, I believe the home game is being spread out evenly throughout the conference. So like if Alabama gets the home game as a 5 seed, they don't get to keep all the money. They have to spread it out amongst the rest of the conference. So we'll see how long this lasts. Because first off, I expect the schools that get the home games to want to keep it. And then I expect the schools who won the conference championship to then want a home game. Because it'd be real easy to sell the tickets. You wouldn't have to see whether or not you won the conference title. Like if you're Georgia, not to bore people here, but if you're Georgia, you sell that first round playoff game in your season ticket package. And if by chance you end up not hosting a game, well, then you say, well, we'll take that money and put it towards next year's season tickets. And most people will go, oh, yeah, okay, sure. So selling the games out on short notice will not be a problem. Because in theory, you're already selling the tickets to your season ticket base.
Yeah, so now into the conference breakdown. I mean, more teams join conferences. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA joined the Big Ten. Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. SMU, Stanford, and Cal joined the ACC. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah joined the Big 12. Did I miss any?
No. And let's see, the Big Ten's now 18 teams. The ACC's now 17. And the SEC and the Big 12 are now 16.
So, I mean, Big Ten wise this year, I mean, Ohio State was number 2 in the polls yesterday, and I really like this Buckeye team. I mean, the Buckeyes have the best running back combo in the country, but there are 2 questions I have with this team. Is Ryan Day more than a good recruiter? Can he actually win a natty? And 2, is Will Howard a game manager? Because I mean, with Chip Kelly coming in as the offensive coordinator, I think Ohio State's got to run the ball and be more physical because Big Ten teams have to be physical.
Well, I think Will Howard fits Chip Kelly offensive scheme really well. We'll see if he's good enough. That to me is the question. I have more questions about Will Howard than I do Ryan Day, because Ryan Day, I think, has the best roster outside of the quarterback position in the sport this year, D. So, and a big part of being a head coach is being the general manager, is acquiring the talent. And Ohio State spent like $15 million this offseason to make sure certain guys stayed and certain guys transferred there. So I think Ohio State, outside of the quarterback position, has the best roster in the sport. Now they go to Oregon. They've got a couple of games. I don't know that Ohio State runs the table, but I expect that Ohio State will not only be in the playoff, I think at the end of the day, they'll win the Big Ten, that they'll get to the title game. And if they play Oregon again on a neutral field, that they'll beat them. And I think the road to the Natty, a lot of people say it goes through Athens. I have a feeling it's going to go through Columbus.
I agree, and I mean Ohio State's schedule is tough. I mean road trips to Alton, road trips to Happy Valley, Michigan at the end, but it's not impossible. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's going 12-0 this 12-0, 13-0, but the Buckeyes have got a chance, and more importantly, the Buckeyes have the depth where they could win 2 or 3 games against a Georgia and Alabama or Oregon if need be.
Well, there's no doubt Georgia and Ohio State have the most depth, and Georgia has the more proven quarterback. And for that matter, Georgia's won natties, and Ohio State under Ryan Day is still trying. I think Ryan Day's Buckeyes were more than prepared for Michigan last year. Their quarterback wasn't good enough to beat them. I mean, it was as simple as that. If they had a better quarterback last year, I actually think they win that game. They were more than prepared and played Georgia very tough in that national semi. Should have won the game, to be honest with you. Georgia's experience carried the day late. Ohio State kind of panicked and didn't get the job done. I think this group, Michigan's group was on a mission last year. They had made the semis 2 years in a row, won back-to-back Big Ten titles, but a lot of guys came back to finish the job. A lot of guys in Columbus came back this year to finish the job that they feel they've left out there the last 2 years. I think you can draw a lot of similarities between Michigan and Ohio State from last year to this year.
And Ohio State doesn't have a gauntlet non-conference schedule. There's no Michigan playing Texas on Ohio State's schedule.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, like last year, Georgia's schedule was a cupcake. This year, I mean, look at Michigan, even though one of them's a conference game, but just their home games in September, Texas and USC. Hello. And then in November, I believe Michigan's got to play Oregon at home and at Ohio State.
Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I think Michigan is the lowest ranked defending national champion in like 15 years. Is their schedule's pretty darn challenging. Never mind all that they've lost. So yeah, Ohio State doesn't have that non-conference gauntlet. The only game that they have a chance to be an underdog in is when they go to Outson in the second Saturday in October and they play at Oregon.
Well, I don't think the 12-team playoff benefits any team more than Penn State, because Penn State's been good enough to be a top 10 team, but not quite in that top 4.
I agree with you because Penn State has proven they can beat everybody except Ohio State and Michigan. And that was enough to keep them out of all the important games in the Big Ten, keep them out of the Big Ten title game most years and keep them out of a BCS. Now, if by chance, and they don't even play Michigan this year, but if by chance they were to lose those 2 games, you post to 10-2, they'd probably get into the playoff in some way, shape, or form. I do think Notre Dame benefited also from the playoff structure. They can't get a first round bye, but they can host a playoff game. And based on preseason rankings, Notre Dame is expected to host a playoff game this year. They're in the top 8 in just about every preseason poll that you see. And for what it's worth, at the time that we're taping, the AP poll was released yesterday. Take a look at the top 7 in the AP poll. 28 of the last 30 years, the national champion was preseason top 7.
Yeah, and what I like about and I think the big question with Penn State is going to be the development of Drew Allen, because I mean it seemed like every time I watched Penn State play last year, it was being sacked. But
well, there's 2 quarterbacks in the Big Ten, D, and I agree with you. The Penn State quarterback and the Iowa quarterback. Iowa only has 1 ranked team on their schedule. That's at Ohio State. That's it. Iowa could very easily be favored in 11 of the 12 games they play. All right, but they've got McNamara, the transfer from Michigan, who got hurt early last year, and A, don't know if he's 100% from that knee injury, and B, don't know if he's good enough. I mean, there's a reason Michigan moved on from him. But if Iowa could get above average quarterback play, they have a really good chance to make the playoff. I mean, if Iowa gets above average quarterback play, D, they'll win at least 10 games. They might win 11. And you're right. Penn State needs, Ohio State and Penn State, arguably the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. They both wonder, is their quarterback good enough? In Penn State, I think they also wonder what they wonder in Miami. Is our coach good enough? Is our coach a good enough game day coach? We've got the roster. Can we now win during the 3.5 hours when he's making decisions?
Yeah, and then maybe the most interesting team joining the Big Ten this year is Oregon because, I mean, you talk about NIL, Oregon spent a lot of money and getting Dylan Gabriel, who I think this is what Dylan Gabriel's third or fourth school, right?
Well, UCF, Oklahoma for sure. I don't know if there was another one. But, D, if you think about it, shouldn't Oregon be a big NIL player or pay for play or whatever it is you want to call it from now till the end of time? I mean, when you're Nike University, I mean, how many times are you going to be outbid for a player?
None.
So, I mean, shouldn't Oregon be a national power till the end of time?
You would think.
Well, they're not going to lack for money. And I mean, let's face it, college football now is pay for play. So now kids may not want to go to Eugene, Oregon and play, and that's why they may not get a bunch of kids. But, you know, they should be able to get 24 of them every year that go, yeah, I'll take Nike's money. Sure.
But when I see Oregon play, I mean, it seemed like Dylan Gabriel was struggling in Oklahoma because they wanted him to throw the deep ball. Gabriel's like a point guard, Bo Nix. I think Dylan Gabriel fits Oregon their team, and I like that Oregon gets Ohio State at home because there aren't many better atmospheres in college football than Eugene. I mean,
No,
maybe LSU at night, but
no, there's no doubt. I mean, you know, Oregon's got the schedule. They only play two teams that are ranked. They're Ohio State and Michigan, I believe, are their only two ranked teams on their schedule. One home, one away. And there's no doubt they're top 10 talent, maybe top 5 talent. You know, they had 2 cracks at Washington last year, though, and couldn't get the job done either time. So Dan Lanning has to prove, you know, he opened a season 2 seasons ago against Georgia and got beat by 6 touchdowns. I mean, Oregon has to prove they can win a big game also. They've proven they can put a product together. They've proven they can play in the game. Now this group has to prove they can win the game.
yeah, and also not just win, but win a big game because every coach needs a defining win. And we saw that with Michigan last year, get a win over Alabama, get a win over Ohio State a few years ago. Dan Lanning needs that win in Eugene.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's only been there a couple of years, but there's no question. I mean, if you want to contend for a natty, I think Dan's in a similar spot where Kirby Smart was early in his Georgia tenure. You know, his breakthrough year was year 2 at Georgia. Dan's breakthrough year was year 2 at Oregon. And, you know, it took Kirby a while to win the big game. And now Kirby's won a bunch of them. 2 natties, a couple of SEC titles. You know, Kirby, for the most part, has got it figured out. And now that Nick's no longer at Alabama, I mean, basically the only speed bump Kirby had the last half dozen years in the SEC was Nick.
So another Big Ten newcomer is USC, and I'm struggling to figure out what SC we're going to have this year because SC couldn't stop the nosebleed defensively. Obviously, Caleb Williams with the Bears, but the starter coming in played well in the Holiday Bowl. I mean, USC's schedule is a gauntlet.
It's hard. It's hard. It's not Florida's schedule. It's not South Carolina's schedule, but it is hard. And even if they manage it really well, then their final regular season game is Notre Dame, a legit top 10 team who might be a top 5 team by the time they play at USC. So, yeah, it's hard. I mean, USC could be a really good 8-4 team. That's how challenging their schedule is. They revamped their defensive coaching staff. I think they will get, maybe not right this year, but I think very soon, they will get the defensive personnel to match their offensive personnel. I think USC is going to be okay in the transition to the Big Ten. I do. I expect USC, give it a couple years, that USC will be just as formidable as Penn State and Michigan year in, year out. I truly believe that. I think UCLA is going to crash and burn. I think it'll become a bottom feeder school in the Big Ten. And I think that the future of football at UCLA is in big trouble.
I think USC is going to be in a better spot. Plus, the Pac-12 was chock full of quarterbacks last year. I mean, look at the Big Ten. I mean, Rutgers, Nebraska, Iowa, Maryland. There might be. I think if you can get the right schedule in the Big Ten and avoid some of these teams, maybe you could. Maybe SC could sneak up. I don't think SC. I think that first game against LSU is going to tell us a lot about SC.
Well, you mentioned Rutgers. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit's already mentioned that they're a sleeper to make the playoff because they only play one ranked team this year. And you take a look at their Big Ten schedule, it's about as soft as you could draw up. I mean, they've got, I think, a road game at Nebraska. By the way, that's my sleeper team in the Big Ten. I think Nebraska wins at least 9 games. I think their quarterback is the quarterback we're going to be talking about, Dylan Raiola, when this season is over. I think he's a stud. And I think he'll be a top 5 pick in the draft in a couple of years. And Matt Rule can coach. And they lost 4 games by a field goal last year. I actually think Nebraska is the sleeper team that is going to upset a team or two in the Big Ten this year. But you're right, D. We have to pay more attention to schedules than ever before because, I mean, you could just look at the SEC. You've got the schedule that Florida and South Carolina and Oklahoma have, for that matter. And then you look at the schedule that Missouri got. And it can happen. You know, sometimes it's your year and sometimes it's not. Then in Florida's situation, you also schedule non-conference Florida State and Miami. So you have to believe Florida is going to have a really difficult schedule going forward because they're not going to lose Florida State on the schedule. And they're going to probably get 3 ranked teams a year, at least from the SEC. So that's 4 ranked games a year. Well, that's a lot if you take a look at comparative schedules. And this year, Florida has 8 ranked teams on their schedule. But Oklahoma's got 6. OU's schedule is hard. And Texas has already lost their top 2 running backs for the year to knee injuries. They have 3 running backs, scholarship running backs left on their roster. All right. And now you're in the SEC where moving a linebacker to running back or a wide receiver to running back, which they're proposing doing, that ain't going to get the job done. You know, week 2, Texas is at Michigan. Never mind all the other games they got to play on their schedule. And you don't have a running back that can hurt opposing defenses in the SEC. I know you got Quinn Ewers and a couple of NFL wide receivers, but you don't think teams will be able to, you know, defend that? So pay attention. Pay a couple of key injuries in the right spot and look out.
And then quickly with Michigan, I know Michigan was number 9 in the AP poll, but I don't think Michigan's the top 10 team this year. They lost so much from that team. Almost now with the Chargers, and Michigan's schedule this year is much harder. Texas, SC, and Ohio,
and Oregon, I believe.
Ohio State.
And Oregon, I believe. Now they get Texas, USC, and Oregon at home. They're at Ohio State. You know, yes, it is challenging. I think the Texas game is big for them in terms of how can they seriously contend for the playoff. I think they have to beat Texas. That could be a tiebreaker game at the end of the year. We're comparing 10-2 or 9-3 teams and who should get in. The head-to-head. The other thing, D, there's 3 early season SEC Big Ten matchups. There's Alabama at Wisconsin. There's USC, LSU in Vegas. And there's Texas at Michigan. So the SEC school is not home for any of those 3 matchups. And that could have a big say because if you do the math, a 12-team playoff, even if you put 2 in from the ACC, 1 from the Big 12, 1 from the Group of 5, and Notre Dame, you know, that's 6. Then the Big 10 and SEC each get 3. But if you only put 1 school in from the ACC, like last year, the ACC only would have gotten 1 bid in a 12-team playoff. Well, then there's 7 bids between the Big 10 and the SEC. So one's going to get 4 and the other's going to get 3. Well, which conference is going to get the extra bid? The September non-conference games could go a long way to determining which conference will get the extra bid.
Yeah, and then now under the SEC, I mean, Georgia looks ready. Georgia on the field looks ready to rumble again. I think Carson Beck coming into this year is probably the best quarterback in the country. It's just can Kirby Smart keep his guys from going AWOL away from the field?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, they have a driving problem at Georgia, that is for sure.
They
But
drive
they
way
don't.
too fast in Athens.
Yeah, they don't have a talent problem though. I mean, they're young at a couple position groups, but they don't have a talent problem. Their schedule's much tougher than it was last year though. Like this could be a Georgia team that's national championship worthy that goes 10-2. Because this is probably the toughest regular season schedule that Kirby has played since he's been at Georgia. So, that's the other thing. Alabama's got a tougher regular season schedule than we're used to seeing Alabama have. Kalen DeBoer and company could have be a really good team and be 9-3 this year. So that's the other thing, D, that if you take a look at the impact of the 12-team playoff, not only do we have now these 4 monstrous conferences, and with unbalanced scheduling, we're getting some teams to play a much tougher schedule than normal, but we're also getting some non-conference games that we weren't getting. Why? Because if you lost 1 game before this year, it was the end of the world. Well, now you can lose 2 and make the playoffs in most cases if you're in the SEC or the Big Ten. So I think you're going to see better scheduling come about because of the 12-team playoff. Plus, if you're the ACC or the Big 12, don't you have to raise your hand and say to the SEC and Big Ten, hey, we'll play you. We'll even come to you and play you. We'll play you, because they got to figure out a way to get multiple bids in their leagues. And the only way to do it is not to play each other. They got to play the big boys and start winning a couple.
And more importantly, no divisions anymore, which means you could have Ohio State, Michigan, or Alabama open 2 straight weeks.
No doubt. You could have Florida State, Miami, maybe. By the way, Miami plays 1 ranked team based on preseason polls. It's tough to buy into Miami because 20 years we've been saying, oh, Miami's back, and they've only been back like once. But Miami has a top 15 roster in the country. They have arguably the best roster in the ACC. But Mario Cristobal is not highly thought of as a game coach. That Florida-Miami week 1 game is huge. We all know why for the Gators. But if Miami wins it, look out. They'll probably be favored in 11 of their 12 games if they beat the Gators. And who knows? If they beat the Gators, they may be 7-0 hosting the Noles.
And then College Game Day might be at Hard Rock for that night.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have Florida State and Miami mean what it used to.
Yeah, so obviously Texas joined the SEC. We saw what Texas did against Alabama last year. Quinn Ewers back again, but I think right now Texas might need to get Bijan Robinson from the Atlanta Falcons.
Well, there's no doubt they're short at tailback. I think Oklahoma's first year in the SEC could be a 7-5 type season, even though they think they're pretty good this year. They have a very challenging schedule, 6 ranked teams. So, yeah, I mean, I think the college football fan is ready for this, and 12 is going to go to 14 within 3 seasons. So, yeah, I think we're ready. I mean, D, I predict by the end of the decade we're at 16 teams. Or maybe when the contract ends in 2031, that's when we go to 16 teams. But, we're at 12. We go to 14 in 2026. And once we get to 14, why not 16?
Yeah, by the way, there's also change. I mean, for the first time since 2006, Nick Saban's not the coach at Alabama. Kalen DeBoer's now in Tuscaloosa. Good luck, because you got to replace the GOAT, and Alabama's schedule is challenging.
It is. It's challenging. There's no doubt. But, I mean, think about it. We lose Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban from the sidelines this past offseason. So there's no Urban Meyer anymore. I mean, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, the 2 guys who do the speaking on behalf of college football now. I mean, honestly, if there's an issue in college football, who do you go talk to now? Probably Kirby and Dabo. And so there's no doubt there's a little changing of the guard. Don't know how many active Hall of Fame coaches we have in college football, but give it a few years.
maybe Mac. I don't know if you would call Mac Brown a Hall of Fame coach.
Well, yes. I mean, won the Natty, brought Texas back. Yeah, I consider him a Hall of Fame coach if his winning percentage is good enough. They're a stickler there. Their requirements are strict. It has to be 60% or more, but I'm pretty sure Mac qualifies. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if Mac's already in.
Yeah, because he took off a few years after his Texas stint.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, how will Alabama adjust to no Nick Saban this year? I mean, I think Kalen DeBoer is a great young offensive mind, but it's got to be freaky not having Nick Saban.
Well, you can't envision that they'll be better coached. They'll just be coached differently. And listen, DeBoer's lost 12 games in 9 years. I mean, he's a hell of a coach, obviously. But you would have to think first go around in the SEC, they'll lose at least one game that Nick would have won because he's Nick and because he knows the conference and other coaches' tendencies and what have you. So, I have Alabama more likely to be 9-3 than 11-1. I'm not as high on Jalen Milroe as everybody else. He was not good against Michigan. He wasn't good most of the game against Auburn, except for the last pass in the corner of the end zone. I find him very inconsistent. Terrific if he gets out of the pocket, inconsistent in it. So that to me, DeBoer's a bit of a quarterback whisperer, D. And look at what he did with Penix, who was far superior than what he was at Indiana. So let's see what he does with Jalen Milroe with a full year to work with him.
Who might be the sneaky team in the SEC this year? Tennessee. Tennessee, because they get Alabama at home. Yes, they play Georgia and Athens, but we know Josh Heupel was a really good quarterback. Of course, Joe Milton now maybe excited a few fans in Foxborough, but Tennessee intrigues me this year, and I think Tennessee's going to be able to put up points no matter who they play. Yes, Tennessee's schedule is hard. They get Alabama at home. They play Florida, go to Athens. But am I crazy for saying that?
Well, no. I mean, they're a consensus top 15 team in the country. They're one of the 9 teams that are ranked out of the SEC. So, could they be one of the 4 teams in theory that makes the playoff out of the SEC? Absolutely, they could. My team is LSU because I think Nussmeier at quarterback is a stud. In fact, if you were to just look at quarterbacks chucking it, just throwing the football, if we lined up 20 quarterbacks from the top programs in college football, I don't know if anybody throws the ball better than Nussmeier. He's very impressive. And Brian Kelly is an outstanding offensive coach. Now, they're young defensively, and they have a challenging schedule, opening with USC, which, if you think about it, what has LSU done the first 2 years under Brian Kelly? They've lost the big early season non-conference game. Florida State's beaten them each of the last 2 years. So I think that opener for LSU is big because we know that their SEC schedule would be challenging, but they need to win the big non-conference showdown, USC in Vegas. They need to win it. And I think Nussmeier against that USC defense will throw for 350 and 4 or 5 touchdowns. And LSU might be my sleeper team. If LSU at number 12 in the country can be a sleeper, all right, you pick Tennessee top 15. I'm picking top 12. But, this isn't playing the schedule or anything like that. I'm just talking about in terms of they're better than you think. I think that team is LSU.
And by the way, speaking of schedule, the team with the hardest schedule I've ever seen in college football is Florida.
Without question.
Florida plays 11 Power 5 teams. They've got, in Florida's non-conference, Miami, UCF, and Florida State. So if Florida wins all 3 games, the Gators are going to be state champs this year. But then Florida's SEC schedule, A&M, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee, Kentucky. Wait for this schedule: Georgia in Jacksonville, Texas in Austin, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State.
It's arguably the toughest 5-game gauntlet in the history, at least on paper. They're all ranked and all in a row, no weeks off. And 8 ranked teams to begin the season, 11 Power 4 opponents, as you mentioned. Scott Strickland has done his coach no favors. He should have bought out of one of these games at the very least. And the SEC, with the unbalanced scheduling, didn't do Billy Napier any favors either. Billy needs to make a bowl game this year. There's no question about it, or else the natives aren't going to care about the schedule. They're going to want him replaced. Their talent level is the best it's been, but he's already suffered some significant injuries. He lost a D lineman earlier this week to a broken ankle for the season. So, the Miami game is huge because that 5-game stretch, they could be an underdog in 05. Remember, they lost their last 5 games last year. They were 5-2 and lost out. Well, the same thing could happen again this year. So Billy's got to be 5-2 or 6-1. Got to be. And that's opening with Miami. That's going to Tennessee. Kentucky will be a toss-up game. The A&M game will be a toss-up game. I mean, yeah, it's brutal. It is brutal. I would double down on Billy Napier if I were Florida, because outside of getting Lane Kiffin, I don't know that they can do any better in the next couple of years. But, there's no doubt he's coaching for his job, and the program is teetering.
Yeah, and also, and plus, in a way, I think there are 3 or 4 fan bases that don't like losing, and we know what those are: Auburn, Florida, and I don't know if you put Ohio State in that class, because if Ohio State goes 11-1, the fans riot.
Well, if the one is Michigan, they do.
Yes.
So, I mean, the schedule's brutal. Bobby Bowden had a 5-game stretch early 80s in which it was the 5 weeks in a row that really made him and Florida State on the national scene. They played 5 ranked teams in a row, almost all of them on the road, and they went 3-2. And I feel that this is kind of going to be that gauntlet for Billy Napier. I mean, if you're a Florida fan right now, you would take 2-3 in that 5-game stretch right now. You would. You would take 2-3. Even if you bookend them with losses to Georgia and Florida State, your 2 most bitter rivals. If you could somehow, some way between Texas, Ole Miss, and who's the other one?
LSU.
Okay. You win 2 of those 3. I mean, we're talking about one team ranked 4th, one team ranked 6th, and one team ranked 12th. I mean, where's the breather in this 5-game stretch? I mean, the easiest game in the schedule could be at Florida State when all's said and done. It really could be.
I mean, that would be interesting because, I would think Florida State, honestly, I think Clemson's the big loser in this NIL transfer portal business, because Dabo's not gotten involved with the portal. Could it be FSU and Miami in the ACC?
Well, we'll see. I will say Clemson this year is as good as anybody in that conference. I don't know if it continues with him not embracing the portal, never mind, pay for play. But, we'll see. But for this year, Clemson, Florida State, Miami is a bit of a flip of a coin. If I were to throw a sleeper in from the ACC, look out for SMU. They're good, and they play one ranked team all year, and it's Florida State at home the week before the Noles play Clemson. I'm telling you, remember, Louisville made the ACC title game last year largely based on who they didn't play. Could SMU do the same thing a year later?
And then Big 12 wise, throw your name in a hat, because I think any one of 6 or 7 teams could win that conference.
I think the best team on paper is Utah. Oklahoma State may have the best schedule. And it's remarkable to see both Kansas schools nationally ranked in football. Remarkable to see.
I would think I would trust Oklahoma State and Utah because of the coaches and quarterbacks who've been there for I think the quarterbacks have been there for 50 years.
Yeah, they both have a way of having 6 and 7 year players, that's for sure. But I think Utah will do well in the transition. I actually think Arizona is going to be okay in the transition, also, particularly this year. We'll see long term, but the big question, D, and I know we're pressed for time, is UCF is expected to finish middle of the pack in the Big 12. You know, the 4 new entrants last year all didn't do well. UCF, there's a little bit of expectation to Gus Malzahn and the Knights this year. And they have a big game in terms of profile, besides the fact they're playing the Gators in the Swamp, but they'll host Dion in Colorado this year. And that'll get some attention. Dion coming back to the state and what have you. So, you know, I'm curious, can Gus go 8-4 this year? There's a little bit of expectation. When they hired Gus, they thought Gus was going to, you know, solidify them in the big time. They may be in the Big Four, but they haven't, you know, they played Oklahoma to the gun last year, but they've yet to have that, you know, win under Gus in which you go, aha, Gus needs that win this year.
I mean, if you had a bold prediction to make for this college football season, what would it be?
Well, I mean, it'd be really difficult to pick against both Georgia and Ohio State because they're the 2 deepest teams in the country. And so you figure, do you really care how they make the playoff? I mean, let's just say they each don't even get a first round bye. Well, they'll be at home in the second round. They'll both win. You know, there's a good chance they'll actually be favored in the next round. I mean, you know, until proven otherwise. I mean, what did I say? The stat, you know, basically the national champion comes from the top 7 teams in the preseason polls. You know, Alabama, I'm not a believer this year that they'll be at the elite level. Texas is already suffering injuries. And, you know, we go to, believe it or not, a sleeper team. Notre Dame is a team that has a much better shot. You know, I think Notre Dame makes the national semis this year. How about that? I think they host a playoff game, and I think there's a real shot for Notre Dame to make the semis.
Ooh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Starting the season Irish and have an Irish team play in the
Well,
last.
if they beat A&M, tell me the game that they'll be an underdog in the rest of the way.
SC maybe.
It's at SC, and they could be 11-0 when they go there. I mean, it's another. You know, we talked about the Big Ten SEC non-conference matchups. A&M could do a lot of good for the SEC August 31st by beating Notre Dame, and it will be hot at College Station. They'll have a big weather advantage over the Notre Dame kids who have not played or practiced in anything like that this August. Because it'll be heat index of 100 at Kyle Field.
You've been to the 12-man a few times.
Yep.
I think I remember. Were you at the game when like Alabama came there? It was like 108 degrees.
Oh yeah. I was at all of them. I think I've been at, you know, the last 5 Alabama A&M games at Kyle Field. Oh yeah. There was no cool breeze at any of them. So it's a sexy season on paper. It really is. Got a lot of good non-conference matchups. Obviously, the conferences are all really deep now because they're huge. Unbalanced scheduling. It'll be very entertaining, I think.
All right, David. Thanks for hopping on. You can check out David Moulton as CBS broadcasts Ohio State Week 1 and on August 30th, right?
31st.
31st.
Yep.